I am a baby boomer. And the reason there were so many of us born in the late 1940s and early 50s, in the words of David Barry, was that our parents' generation, having endured the misery of the Depression and the horror of the war years, evidently spent not much of 1946 in the sack. My older sister was born in 1946, but I was born in January 1951. Later, I would question how the world ever got along without me. However, when I opened my eyes to the light of day, it was already buzzing with many activities. 1951 was the year Lucille Ball became the star of a new television show called I Love Lucy, which featured stories about the anxiety of being a homemaker. Roy Rogers debuted on television, featuring Roy and his wife Dale, his horse Trigger, her horse Buttermilk, their dog Bullet, the comic sidekick Pat, and Pat's Jeep, which was called Nellie Bell. This show would not be confused with The Adventures of Wild Bill Hickok, where the comic sidekick was named Jingles and the horse was named Buckshot, nor with The Cisco Kid, where the comic sidekick was named Poncho. In sports, the Giants signed Willie Mays that year, the Yankees signed Mickey Mantle, and Joe DiMaggio retired. The year I was born was also the year that Jill Biden was born. Joe Biden was already 9 years old. A year after I was born, Elizabeth II became queen. The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet debuted on television. In the world of music, the song "The Doggie in the Window" was recorded by Patti Page in December 1952. You know, I kept suggesting that as our song for this morning. How much is that doggie in the window? But for some reason, that wasn't considered appropriate. It sold more than 2 million copies, though, in 1952. More important, Jonas Salk developed a vaccine for polio, and here in Media, Pennsylvania, in 1952, a group of Unitarians founded this church. Over 72 years, I have been basically a happy person. I've had good health. I've never gone without food or shelter or friends. The only time I remember getting depressed over my age was the year I turned 40. My hair started to turn gray that year. To feel better about my situation, I kind of went through a midlife crisis, and to feel better about my situation, I decided it was time to look for a large Unitarian Universalist church to serve. And 2 years later, I was called to serve as the senior minister of the Cedar Lane Church in Bethesda, Maryland, which with 900 members was one of the largest Unitarian Universalist congregations in the United States. I had more status, but I also had more gray hair and, for some reason, more anxiety. I was still processing my feelings about growing older. Now, ministers often preach to ourselves, and 30 years ago, I decided to do a sermon on aging. About 40% of that congregation that I was serving was over the age of 65, and most had graduate degrees from major universities and many years of life experience working and raising families. So it would have been kind of arrogant for me in my 40s to tell them about aging. They were experts on growing old. So I invite them to help me. I asked them several questions, and 28 members of that congregation took the time to write me their answers in detail. and I used their words in a sermon series, and it helped me gain perspective. I was thinking about my own gray hair and a mole that started on my forehead, and it kept growing back even if I paid to have it removed. I felt like I was losing my youthful looks. One of my questions about the changes we experience in our physical appearance as we grow older was, how do you feel about, as you get older, getting more ugly? A woman who had retired from working at the National Institute of Health, wrote back. She said, "As a scientist, I have been awed by the incredible complexity and function of the human body. It is intriguing to watch it change and adjust. At the same time, it is not surprising to see it become overwhelmed. Wrinkles and gray hair do come as a surprise, but my friends and I choose to call them gray, G-R-E-Y, gray expectations. One should be prepared to accept." Another woman wrote me, "Roger, growing old can be a pain and a worry. It makes it harder for me to feel valued by others. In a culture that puts a high value on beauty, youth, and maleness, being an ugly old woman is about as bad as it gets. And yet, now that I'm older, it isn't as bad as I feared. I don't get the impression that people I know see me as just an ugly old woman." And another said, "Growing older does not necessarily mean growing ugly, Roger. I met a handsome 90-year-old man recently who plays piano for pleasure. He also goes to his office 3 days each week, and he works out at the Y once a week. He is not ugly. I think the secret to avoid growing ugly is threefold. A, maintain an interest in life and what is going on around you. B, keeping a sense of humor. And C, share your good fortune of living so long. Be a volunteer and give time to help someone else. There's beauty in age as well as in youth. What is in the head is more important than how the head looks." And still another wrote, "Recently I visited a friend in her late 80s. When I arrived, she was asleep in her wheelchair. After I spoke to her, she opened her eyes with the most beautiful smile I have ever seen. When I think of her, I remember her beautiful eyes and her radiant smile." And another woman, this was a woman who was a retired senior codebreaker for the National Security Agency. She wrote the book on decoding codes during World War II, and she continued to work in this field until she retired in 1972. So it's appropriate that she began by saying, "The secret is that by now we look for beauty not in externals, but in our friends' inner natures, where true beauty has always lain." Our friends' inner natures. And interestingly enough, that inner beauty of character often comes to show itself in the features of the elderly. And yet another woman wrote to me, "When I was young, my grandmother was my favorite adult, except for my parents. She told exciting stories of the frontier. Everyone did what she told them to do, no matter how large they were. She was about 5 foot tall. I thought it was because she had whiter hair than anyone else. Years later, when my hair turned, I thought of grandmother, and I felt good about myself." And there was a woman who joined me on a trip to visit Unitarians in Transylvania when she was in her 80s. She wrote, Certainly, our appearance changes as we grow older. We look different. We look older, but not necessarily ugly or unattractive. I always do receive a shock when I happen to pass by a mirror, such as in a department store. That reminds me that I do look older. But overall, I'm surprised how much I look like my mother looked. That's not bad, for I had much regard for her. I remember after that trip to Transylvania, our tour group left her at the Budapest train station waiting for a train. She was on her way to Paris on her own, over the age of 80, heading out to explore the world. Well, I also heard from men, not just women, about this issue of growing older and getting ugly. One man wrote, "When I look in the mirror, I am surprised by the old man I meet. But the sparkle in his eyes provokes a lively debate between us." And a retired official from the Library of Congress, he wrote to me, "There's a feeling of beauty in the faces of older persons whose lives have been fulfilled and rewarding." If I remember right, he said, it was Oliver Wendell Holmes who, in his 90th year, on seeing a young lady passing by, said, "Oh, to be 70 again." Another man wrote, "The face changes inevitably, but not necessarily to become ugly. Character, inner experience, the soul molds the face of us oldsters. There can be an autumn beauty in an old face." When I attended our high school's 50th reunion, the class of 1935, I fell romantically in love with a classmate. She looked her age. She also looked beautiful to me. Well, I didn't just ask about beauty and appearance, I asked about memory. Another fear I had at 40 was growing old and losing my memory. There are many jokes about this. You're growing older when getting lucky means you found your car in the parking lot. And the classic one, I believe in the hereafter. When I walk into a room, I ask myself, what am I here after? And you know you are getting older when it takes you 3 tries to call your children by their correct names. Well, my own memory in my own life for spelling words has been poor since I was about 9 years old. I have a dyslexic inability to spell. I also have a less than average memory for all of your names. Thank God you wear name tags. This is a big weakness for a minister. 30 years ago, a member of the church I was serving gave me a report from the National Institute of Aging in Bethesda. The research shows that in 90% of us, the crucial areas of human intelligence do not decline significantly in old age. The study found that the healthy aged brain is active and efficient and just as healthy as the young brain. The ability to use and accumulate a body of general information to make judgments and solve problems continues to rise over the lifespan in healthy, active people. Now, one member of that congregation 30 years ago wrote to me, "Loss of memory is another bugaboo that can usually be kept at bay by good health. Most of us never had reliable memories to begin with. Every time I become annoyed with myself for forgetting something, someone half my age tells me of a similar loss of memory they have experienced. You forget someone's name, or you can't recall it when you want to, but that happens at earlier ages also." Now, the research did show that the speed of our memories does slow as we grow older. A professor of medical gerontology at the University of California wrote that most older people are worried about their memories. The truth of the matter is that the older nervous system continues to acquire information with age. The vocabulary of an older adult is probably twice as big as it was on leaving school. Older people are searching through much more information up there than that younger person. So to find the particular thing means groping around a bit more. This is called benign memory loss. So still an estimated about 10% of us will suffer serious memory loss. In my mind, this raises questions about identity. I wonder, who are we? Because as we lose, are we who we are because of our memories? If we lose our memories, does our identity cease to exist? Well, I've ministered to older persons with memory loss. Our memories, I don't think, are the essence of who we are. I think we are more than simply a vast assembly of nerve cells and their associated molecules. Our memory is like an arm or a leg, and if we lose it, we lose something very, very important. However, we do not cease to exist. The spirit in us that gives us our essential identity is still within us. Now, third, I asked my congregation back then about death. Over the years, church members have taught me about this also. They tell me it is not death that they are concerned about, but the process of dying. Listen to their words. A woman wrote, "For 10 years I was terrified of dying. This was when our children were very young. I could not think of anyone who could be suitable as a guardian for them, according to my standards, if both of us should die. Since then I have given very little thought to death. I am more afraid of prolonged, painful living. I do not fear death itself, but possible events and illnesses that might occur before death. I would not want to be a burden to a caregiver or live a long time in a nursing home." A man wrote me just a few weeks before his death. He said, "My 31 years in the United States Navy took care of my fear of death. I survived Pearl Harbor, a tidal wave, earthquakes in Japan, and a mountain climbing mishap. As a passenger, I survived several dangerous flights and rough landings of Navy aircraft in the Orient and Vietnam. The diagnosis of my lymphoma around my 80th birthday has not changed my feelings about death." And another said, "Most of my associates seem to feel as I do, that we are fortunate to be alive when most others are dying around us. And we don't fear death, only terrible illness and pain. It is natural that death is feared in youth and in middle age, when there is still the energy and the desire to fulfill dreams. However, as we get older, having fulfilled most of those dreams and see our friends and loved ones leave us one by one, death seems less fearsome. Often, when there has been suffering, it is viewed as a friend. As with every other stage of life, there is a gradual acceptance of reality." Well, as you can see, at 40, I worried about my appearance, about my memory, about dying, and I strived to prove myself by going out and finding the largest Unitarian Universalist church that would have me. The wisdom of the older members of a church I served helped me. And these days, I worry much less. And the more I think about it, 72 is going to be a great year for me. At 72, I've modified my youthful impatience, and I think my judgment and my understanding have vastly improved. I am more confident, more assured, more settled. At 72, I have much less need for status and prestige or approval, and I can find more insight and sources of strength just within myself. I see success in a different light, in terms of my own definitions. At 72, I have simplified and I have focused my life. I'm better when it comes to separating what's important for what's unimportant, the essential from the frivolous. At 72, I've already made most of the mistakes that I will make in my life. Those mistakes are behind me, so I relax, I worry less. Failure is no longer so threatening to my ego. At 72, I've witnessed many tragic mistakes made by others, including our leaders. But I am much more impressed by the wisdom and the decency of most people like you. I believe that in the long run, the future will be positive, will be favorable, will be desirable. At 72, I've learned not to fight with younger people, even if I'm right, because they will be writing my obituary. Yes, I think 72 will be a good year. I look forward to being with all of you through June, being on vacation in July, and retiring for the second time in my life, August 1st. In our hymnal, there's a reading, lovely reading, number 452. I really like it. It says, "Life is a gift for which we are grateful. We gather in community to celebrate the glories and the mysteries of this great gift." Well, a few years ago in church in Bethesda, I used this reading as the closing words. I said, "Life is a gift for which we are grateful. We gather in community to celebrate the glories and the mysteries of this great gift." And then after the service, of course, I greeted people, and Sam Hughes, age 87, who was deputy director of the federal budget under 4 presidents, Eisenhower, Kennedy, Johnson, and Nixon, and then was the acting director of the Smithsonian. For some reason, Congress never voted to make him the acting director of the Smithsonian for 6 years. Well, Sam, at age 87, came up and he shook my hand after the service. And he smiled and he said, "Roger, life is not a gift. Life is a loan." Thinking of Sam, I say, life is a loan for which we are grateful. We gather in community to celebrate the glories and the mysteries of this great loan. Amen. Let's sing our closing hymn.